Good morning, good afternoon, good evening if you're watching this on the replay. If you are watching on the replay, let me know in the comments. What time is it for you and where are you watching from? And a big shout out and hello to everyone who's watching me live. Say hi in the comments so I know who's watching. Okay, so today I'm talking about false consensus effect. Before I explain what that is, let's get a little bit of interaction going to help you to understand it so I can give you an example. So, those of you tuning in already live, you are very prompt, and it's good to see you here so quickly. What I'd like to know from you in the comments, please, is if you were on public transport and there was an elderly person nearby who was clearly unsteady on their feet, and you had a chair and there were no other seats left, would you give up your seat for that person? Let me know in the comments if you would, or if you wouldn't. And then let me know in the comments whether or not you think other people, for the vast majority of people, would make the same choice and the same decision as you. So let me know in the comments. And even if you're watching on the replay, join in. Why not? It's good fun. Good morning, Mr. James Chisholm. Did you hear what I asked you to put in the comments? I'd like to know. Yes, excellent. There seems to be something odd going on with the comments and my ability to see them and things. But yes, cool. So James Chisholm would give up his seat. Good boy, James Chisholm. And do you think most other people, most decent people in that position would do the same thing? Another example. You find a wallet in a shopping trolley and it's got ID in it. It clearly belongs to an old bloke, and it's got a lot of cash in it. What would you do? Would you return the wallet to him or hand it into customer services? Or would you keep it? And if you did hand it in, would you take some of the money first? I mean, there's loads in there. What would you do? Would you hand it all back to him or the supermarket or whatever? Or would you take some for yourself? And I'm not here to make moral judgment on you. So just answer honestly. And how many people do you think the majority of decent people in that position would make the same choice as you? Okay. Yeah, so someone's saying here that I've done this, returned the wallet directly to the owner, and not even a thank you. And that's true, but equally I've done it and had an old chap that was just absolutely overjoyed that he got his wallet back and tried to give me some of his money, and I refused to accept it. And in the end, as a compromise, he bought me a pack of sweets. Wasn't that lovely? Yep, leave it all as it was, and I think the majority would in that position. So here's the point I'm getting at here. What we have a tendency to do is assume and believe that other people would make the same choices that we would given the same circumstance and situation. And that those that wouldn't, it's because they're not right-minded, or they're not decent people, or there's something wrong with them for making a different decision and choice. Good morning, LJ. Thanks for tuning in. So let's give one more example and see what you guys would say to this. Trying to think of moral dilemmas here. A friend has a test coming up. They're a bit concerned about it, and you seem to have stumbled across all the answers to the test that they're about to take. Would you hand that person the answers? No, actually, change that slightly. If you were that person, If you were about to take the test and someone's offering you all the answers to the test in advance, would you take those answers and use them and cheat your way through the test? Or would you take the moral high ground and go and do an honest job of the test yourself? Which would you choose in that situation? So just to clarify that again, you're about to take a test. It's a fairly important one. And someone's offering you a printout of all the answers. Would you take it? Would you cheat? Or would you go in and take the test honestly? And you know what, LJ, you're absolutely right. That is something that I'm going to cover in a moment. Not necessarily specific about kids I was going to talk about, but I will now. Okay, so no, I wouldn't take it. You wouldn't take the answers. And assuming that you wouldn't, or well, whether you would or wouldn't, do you think the majority of people would agree with you or disagree? So here's what I'm getting at. This is the false consensus effect, or consensus bias, as it's known. So interesting, isn't it? Sometimes our initial response is, yeah, absolutely. And then you kind of think, oh, or would I if I was really in that situation? So, I mean, that one's not quite so clear cut as to what's right or wrong. And I guess it depends very much on the test, the circumstances, how important it was, all manner of things. So here's what happens. People see their own behavioral choices and judgments, their values, as being common to wider society. We all have different values. We all have different ways of thinking about things and different priorities. And when asked about that in itself for what it is, most people would agree that, yeah, different people think differently and that's okay. But when it comes down to specific examples, we kind of forget that and we end up assuming, because you see, we have a natural tendency, and this is a big part of what cognitive biases as a whole are, we have a natural tendency to make decisions based on a very small amount of information. So for example, if we're designing a flyer for our business or a new website, we think, I think this way, and this is how I would think about it. This is where I would click. This is what I would look at. And so therefore everyone else will think the same. And so this is a good way of designing it. An experienced designer will recognize that actually, just because that individual views things that way doesn't mean that that's what's going to work for wider society, for everybody and for their customers. Someone who is a web developer, for example, notice I say web developer, not web designer. So someone who's really good at doing all the code and everything in the background isn't necessarily going to be great at making it look good and making it presented in a way that's going to lead people to click in the places they want to click. You need to balance both elements, because if you're really logical and really good at thinking about the coding, you understand how it should work and what's going on behind the scenes. You view the website in a completely different way to someone who's a customer that knows nothing about technology but has come to the website because they're interested in the service or product it provides. Yes, James, that is why I get you to look at my stuff, because you think about things in a weird way. To clarify, you don't think about things in a weird way. Well, you might, but I think about things in a weird way, I would say. But we have, in some ways, quite different perspectives on things. You're really good with numbers. I much prefer words. You are good at thinking about things in a kind of long-term. We think in a very different way about some things. So bouncing ideas off of you is a great example of this. And in fact, that's something I'll come to at the end, because I always talk at the end about how to control for this bias and what you can do to alleviate the negative impacts that it can have. So why do we do this? Why? Well, because we've got very minimal information to go on and we want to make decisions quickly. So we look at the easiest evidence that we've got to help us make these decisions. The easiest and most obvious stuff that we've got is how would we react in that situation? What would we think? And so we assume that other people would do the same. Originally, growing up, developing tribally, our group or tribe would tend to all think the same way. And actually this in group settings, people sharing beliefs confirms this bias even more. But what it also does is it makes it easier for us to fit in, which is an important driver for us and has been for a long time. But it also increases confidence and self-esteem, because if you assume that everyone else thinks the way that you do, then you don't feel so scared about the idea of standing up and voicing your opinion, because you know other people are going to agree with it. Whereas if you think that you're the odd one out and no one else thinks the same as you, you're more likely to keep quiet and not voice your opinion. So it helps you to feel more confident, to grow your self-esteem. There are huge benefits to this bias. In part, it's caused by a few other biases, or at least very closely linked to some other biases. So I will be doing videos about these in the future. So naive realism, self-serving bias, and availability heuristic all play a part in this. But if you don't know what they are, you'll have to wait until I do videos about them. So one of those will be coming up soon. So we make decisions based on very little information. And ultimately, that comes down to our values, our beliefs, what's important to us. And it's easy to assume that because it's important to us, it's important to all people. Now, there's another real benefit we can take here, which is that for those people who don't share the same beliefs and views as you, their opinion's not as important. That doesn't mean you should just disregard it. It's worth listening to and taking it on board, because it helps you to learn and think about things in a different way. But what I mean is, if the top most important value for you, or values for you, include honesty, trust, and fairness, but for someone else it involves money, fun, and laughter, and I don't know, being active, then they're two completely different ways of looking at the world, which means that decisions that are made by those two people will be completely different. What that also means is that if that person who doesn't value trust, honesty, and whatever else judges you and thinks less of you because of the way you act and behave, well, why should that matter to you? Because what's important to them isn't the kind of person that you want to be, and isn't what's important to you. Does that make sense? Not everyone is thinking the same as that person that disagrees with you, and not everyone is thinking the same as you. So we have this tendency to assume that everyone's going to agree and have the same opinion as us. When we look at the current situation in the world, this is causing a lot of, I nearly said a bad word, this is causing a lot of trouble and problems out there right now. There are people, when we talk about COVID and the current situation and the politics around it and everything else, there are some really opposing views. And what it is, we tend to go, well, I understand and I think this way, and I think this way because of X, Y, and Z. And actually, everything I've experienced tells me that this is the right way to think about things for me as an individual. And so if this is the right way to think about things, based on my beliefs, my experiences, and everything else that I've been through, do you know what? However you think as an individual about the situation, anyone else who had had the same beliefs, the same experiences, gone through the same stuff, guess what? They'd believe the same thing. But what we tend to do is we tend to go, well, because I believe this, and it's based on facts, except those facts, by the way, are based on what you believe and what you hold to be true and self-evident, which isn't necessarily a global thing. So anyone who doesn't agree with that must just be missing something. They don't understand, they don't get it, they don't see it, because they're missing your experiences and understanding. However, they're quite likely thinking the same thing. If someone who has a completely opposite opinion, that will still be based on their experiences, their values, their opinions, things that are informing their decision from their lives and beliefs and values. And because we have this tendency to assume that right-minded people will agree with us, the natural assumption is that if someone doesn't, we want to protect that thinking. We want to protect ourselves in believing that we're right, and we want to feel confident in our opinions, because it's pretty hard to operate when you don't believe in your own thoughts. So we assume that these other people aren't quite right. they've missed something, they don't understand, or potentially they're bad people. And it's this latter one that causes, at the moment, is causing a lot of friction all over the place, is that people are assuming that because someone disagrees with them, that means they're a bad person. And you see it all over the internet. So be a bit nicer to each other. Understand that everyone has their own experiences, and that's informing their beliefs, their values, and their behaviors. And sometimes it's going to be hard for them to understand why you're doing things differently. But we're all different. So to go back to this point, where was it? There it is. What about keeping in schools during COVID, etc.? Lots of people making different decisions there. Absolutely. And those decisions will absolutely be being made by those individuals for all of the right reasons for them. They'll believe, rightly or wrongly, and it's right for them, let's be honest, but those people that are making the choice to keep their kids out of school will be doing that for reasons of safety. They'll see it as showing care and compassion, whether that's for their kids or for other people's or for themselves. And those people that are sending their kids to school will believe that that's the right thing to do. Yes, the world would absolutely be a boring place if we were all the same. I love that we're all different. If you take the time to try and really truly understand someone else's perspective and where they're coming from, that doesn't mean you have to change your beliefs and opinion, but understanding theirs can inform you, can help you, and can certainly help you to understand and accept that everyone's different, and that's cool. So, false consensus effect. It's assuming that everyone's going to agree with you, basically. And it's a good thing because it helps us boost our self-esteem and our beliefs. It can be a dangerous thing because it can lead to a lot of friction and struggling to understand other people's perspectives. Remember, seek first to understand, then to be understood, Covey. So that's kind of what it is, where it comes from. One of the best ways to control for this is to deliberately seek out opinions that may be different to yours. If you're creating something new, working on something, or want to think about how something's going to come across, don't just assume that everyone's going to think the same way as you. Find someone else to bounce your ideas off of. Another great example of this for me is when, I hate to use the Brexit word, that's it, I've said it now. But when that was first being discussed and the vote was being put forward initially, one of the first things I did was pick up the phone to someone who I very rarely agree with. There's someone I know who is pretty much diametrically opposed politically on pretty much every point. And I know that I won't agree with him, but I also know that his opinion, his beliefs, and his stance on it will be researched. It will be rational and logical. It's going to follow a very different set of beliefs and values, a very different logic to the one that I would employ. But discussing it with him helps me to really understand the other perspective and the other view on it, which means to me that I'm making a more informed decision. And 9 times out of 10, I'll talk to him, I'll understand it better, but still be even more certain of my stance. But there are times when it really helps me to change my view, even if it's just on elements of it and it doesn't change my overall perspective. But it's really beneficial and helpful to do that. So that's how you can work around it and control for it. The other thing you can do, of course, is just be more aware of it. I say this with pretty much every cognitive bias, is note and accept that you're going to assume that other people agree with you when they don't. The more aware you are, the more prepared you are to accept that, the easier it will be to control for this bias and therefore make better, more informed decisions. So that's false consensus effect. I will be here again next Thursday. Yes, Christmas Eve. And I'm yet to work out exactly how, but I'm going to find some kind of Christmassy way of presenting a cognitive bias exploration video. So tune in, same time next week. Thanks very much for watching. Have a great week. Cheers.